Shanice Wilson wiped down the counter of the Sunrise Diner, just like she had done every weekday for the past 15 years. At 42, she knew all the regulars by name and even knew what they would order before they sat down. The small roadside diner sat just off Highway 16, where truck drivers stopped for coffee and town folks came for the best apple pie in the county. It was raining hard that Tuesday. The diner was half empty, with only a few customers sitting at the tables, mostly truck drivers on their usual routes and a couple of factory workers from the plant down the road. Shanice was refilling coffee cups when she saw him. A small boy walked through the door, water dripping from his too big jacket. He looked about 10 years old. He was skinny, with dark hair that stuck to his forehead from the rain. What caught Shanice's attention most were his eyes. They looked tired, like they had seen too much for someone so young. The boy quietly made his way to the corner booth, far away from everyone else. He sat with his hands folded on the table, looking down. "New kid," said Tina, another waitress. "You want me to take his order?" "I got it," Shanice said, tucking her pen behind her ear. She walked over to the boy's table. He didn't look up. "Hello there, sweetheart. Can I get you something to eat?" Shanice asked in a gentle voice. The boy finally looked up. His eyes darted around nervously before settling back on the table. I don't have much money," he whispered. Shanice noticed dirt under his fingernails and a small tear in his jacket sleeve. Something about him made her heart hurt. "How about a grilled cheese sandwich and some chocolate milk?" "Tuesday special for first-time customers," she said with a warm smile. It wasn't really a special, but the boy didn't need to know that. He nodded slowly, still not meeting her eyes. Shanice went to the kitchen and put in the order herself. She added a side of fries, even though the boy hadn't asked for them. "Frank," she called to the cook, "make this one extra good, okay?" Frank raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. He had known Shanice long enough to trust her judgment. When the food was ready, Shanice brought it to the boy's table. His eyes widened at the sight of the full plate. "I didn't order fries," he said quietly. "They come with the sandwich on Tuesdays." Shanice lied smoothly. "You eat up now." The boy ate slowly at first, like he was afraid someone might take the food away. Then, as if realizing no one would, he began to eat faster. Shanice pretended to clean nearby tables so she could keep an eye on him. When he finished, not a crumb remained on his plate. The boy looked up and, for the first time, met Shanice's eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. "You're welcome, sweetie. You come back tomorrow if you get hungry again," Shanice told him. The boy nodded, slid out of the booth, and walked toward the door. His shoulders seemed a little less hunched. "He didn't pay," Tina whispered as Shanice collected the empty plate. "I know," Shanice replied. "I covered it." Shanice watched through the window as the boy walked away in the rain. He didn't run, just walked steadily down the road until she couldn't see him anymore. That night, as Shanice drove home to her empty apartment, she kept thinking about the boy's eyes. She had seen hungry kids before, but there was something different about this one. Something that made her feel like she needed to keep watch over him. "He'll be back," she said to herself. And somehow, she knew it was true. The next day, Shanice looked up every time the diner door opened. The lunch rush came and went. No sign of the boy. By mid-afternoon, she had almost given up hope. Then, at exactly 4:30, the door swung open. The same skinny boy stood there, wearing the same too big jacket. This time, it wasn't raining, and Shanice could see his face better. His cheeks were hollow, and there was a small scratch above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there yesterday. Without saying a word, he walked to the same corner booth and sat down. "Look who's back," Tina said, nodding toward the boy. "I'll handle it," Shanice replied, already reaching for a menu. She walked over to his table and smiled. "Hey there. Good to see you again." The boy looked up briefly, then back down at the table. His fingers tapped nervously on the worn surface. "We've got meatloaf today, real good with mashed potatoes. Sound okay?" Shanice asked. The boy nodded. Then, so quietly Shanice almost missed it, he said, I still don't have money. Shanice waved her hand. Don't you worry about that. We've got extra food today anyway. Would just go to waste. That wasn't true, but the lie was worth seeing the tension leave the boy's small shoulders. Frank raised his eyebrows when Shanice put in the order but didn't say anything. He did, however, add an extra large serving of mashed potatoes to the plate. The boy ate everything on his plate, just like the day before. This time, though, he ate more slowly, like he wasn't quite as hungry. Is there anything else you'd like? Shanice asked when he finished. The boy hesitated, then shook his head. Well, I've got this piece of apple pie that someone ordered but never came to pick up. Would be a shame to throw it away, Shanice said, already heading to the dessert case. She returned with a generous slice of pie and set it in front of him. The boy's eyes widened. Thank you, he said, his voice a little stronger than yesterday. As he ate the pie, Shanice cleaned nearby tables. She wanted to ask him questions, where he lived, where his parents were, why he was alone, but she didn't. Something told her that asking too much might scare him away. The next day, the boy returned at the same time. And the day after that. Soon, it became a routine. Every day at 4:30, he would slip into the diner and sit in the same corner booth. Shanice would bring him whatever the special was, always claiming it was extra or about to be thrown out. After a week, Frank pulled Shanice aside. You know the kid's not paying, right? He asked, folding his arms across his chest. Shanice straightened her shoulders. I know. I'm covering his meals. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. No, you're not. The food's on the house. Shanice stared at her boss in surprise. But, Frank added, holding up a finger, we need to know his name at least. Can't just keep feeding some mystery kid. That day, when the boy finished his chicken soup, Shanice sat down across from him. I'm Shanice, she said gently. I've been wanting to introduce myself properly. The boy looked at her with cautious eyes. The cook over there, that's Frank. He's wondering what we should call you, since you're becoming a regular and all. The boy was quiet for so long that Shanice thought he might not answer. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he said, Marcus. My name is Marcus. Marcus, Shanice repeated with a smile. That's a good name. My daddy's name was Marcus. For the first time, the corners of the boy's mouth turned up slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. As Marcus left the diner that day, Shanice noticed he walked with his head a little higher. A name was a small thing, but it was a beginning. A tiny thread connecting them. 3 weeks passed. Every day, Marcus came to the diner at 4:30. Every day, Shanice had food ready for him. With each visit, Marcus seemed to relax a little more. He still sat in the corner booth, but he no longer kept his head down the whole time. One rainy afternoon, the diner was nearly empty. After Marcus finished his meal, Shanice brought him a cup of hot chocolate and sat down across from him. Mind if I join you for a minute? My feet are killing me, she said. Marcus shook his head. He wrapped his small hands around the mug of hot chocolate. So, Marcus, Shanice said carefully, you live around here. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he nodded. Not far, he said softly. With my grandma. Shanice smiled, happy to learn even this small piece of information. Your grandma? That's nice. Does she know you come here? Marcus looked down at his hot chocolate. She's always sleeping. She's real tired. What about your mom and dad? Shanice asked gently. Marcus's face closed up. Don't have those. Shanice knew when to stop pushing. Well, you're always welcome here. You know that, right? Marcus nodded. After a moment, he asked, do you have kids? Shanice's face brightened. This was the first question he had ever asked her. Yes, I do. My son Jason is in the Army. And my daughter Keisha is in college in California. They're all grown up now. Do you miss them? Marcus asked. Every single day, Shanice answered honestly. My apartment feels too quiet without them. Marcus seemed to think about this. Then he said, my grandma's place is quiet too. The next day, Shanice noticed a dark bruise on Marcus's wrist when his sleeve rode up as he reached for his water glass. When she asked about it, he quickly pulled his sleeve down. I fell, he said, and went back to eating his food in silence. Shanice didn't push, but she watched more carefully after that. She started adding extra food to his plate. Enough for 2 people. Marcus never ate it all at the diner. Instead, he carefully wrapped the extra food in napkins and put it in his pocket before leaving. Taking some home? Shanice asked one day. For Grandma, Marcus said. Sometimes she forgets to eat. As the days went by, Marcus began to share tiny pieces of his life. Shanice learned that he went to the elementary school 2 miles away. He was in 4th grade. His favorite subject was math because the answers are always right or wrong, no in between. He didn't have friends at school because the other kids were too loud. One day, Marcus came in with a small paper in his hand. He slid it across the table to Shanice. What's this? She asked. Got 100 on my math test, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Shanice looked at the paper with its red 100 circled at the top. Well, look at that. That's amazing, Marcus. For the first time, Marcus smiled a real smile. It transformed his whole face, making him look like the child he was supposed to be. Frank came over with an ice cream sundae. Special treat for special grades, he said, placing it in front of Marcus. That evening, when Marcus left, Shanice watched him through the window. As he walked away, she noticed he was wearing the same shoes he'd worn every day for weeks. They were falling apart at the seams. At home that night, Shanice opened her closet and found a shoebox. Inside were new sneakers she had bought for her nephew's birthday, but hadn't sent yet. They looked about Marcus's size. Sorry, Darius, she said to herself. I'll get you something else. The next day, she brought the shoebox to work. When Marcus walked into the diner that day, Shanice was ready with the shoebox. Got something for you, she said, placing the box on the table next to his usual plate of food. Marcus looked at the box with confusion. Go ahead, open it, Shanice encouraged him. Slowly, Marcus lifted the lid. Inside were the new blue and white sneakers. His eyes widened. These are for me, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Those old shoes of yours are falling apart. Can't have my favorite customer getting wet feet. Now can I? Shanice said with a smile. Marcus touched the shoes gently, like they might break. Thank you, he said, and there were tears in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. Try them on, she urged. Marcus took off his old shoes. They had holes in both soles, and the laces were just pieces of string tied together. The new sneakers fit perfectly. He walked around the diner in them, looking down at his feet with wonder. That day when Marcus left, he carried his old shoes in the shoebox. He walked taller, and for once, he looked like any other happy 10-year-old boy. The next day, Marcus didn't come to the diner. Shanice kept looking at the door every time it opened. She checked the clock repeatedly. 4:30 came and went. No Marcus. Maybe he's just busy, Tana suggested when she noticed Shanice's worried face. Yeah, maybe, Shanice agreed, but she felt uneasy. The next day, Marcus didn't show up either. Shanice could hardly focus on her work. She dropped a coffee pot, spilling hot coffee all over the floor. She mixed up 2 customers' orders. What's eating you? Frank asked her during a quiet moment. It's been 2 days, Frank. That boy has never missed 2 days in a row before, Shanice said, wringing her hands. Could be sick. Could be his grandma took him somewhere, Frank suggested, but he looked worried too. By the 3rd day with no Marcus, Shanice was truly afraid. After her shift ended, she decided to drive around the neighborhoods near the diner. She didn't know exactly where Marcus lived, but he had said it wasn't far. She drove slowly through the streets, looking for any sign of a small boy with new blue and white sneakers. She saw other children playing, other houses with lights on, but no Marcus. As darkness fell, Shanice reluctantly headed home. She couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the bruise on Marcus's wrist, about his grandmother who was always tired, about the food he took home. On the fourth day, just when Shanice was thinking about calling the police, the diner door opened at 4:45. Marcus walked in. Shanice felt such relief that she nearly cried. But as Marcus got closer, her relief turned to concern. His face was thinner than before. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had a new bruise, this one on his cheek. "Marcus," she said, rushing to him, "where have you been? I was so worried." Marcus slid into his usual booth. "Grandma got real sick," he said quietly. "Couldn't leave her alone." Shanice sat down across from him. "Is she better now?" Marcus shook his head. "A man came to help, but he's not nice." "What man, Marcus?" Shanice asked, feeling a cold fear in her stomach. "Grandma's friend. He stays now," Marcus whispered. He looked up at Shanice with frightened eyes. "He doesn't like me to leave the house." "Did he hurt you?" Shanice asked, pointing to the bruise on his cheek. Marcus looked down quickly. "I fell," he said, but his voice shook. Shanice didn't believe him for a second. She brought him a large plate of food and watched as he ate quickly, like he hadn't had a proper meal in days. As he was leaving, she noticed he wasn't wearing the new sneakers she had given him. "What happened to your new shoes?" she asked. Marcus looked at his old shoes, now back on his feet. "He took them," was all he said before he walked out the door. That night, Shanice couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Marcus, his bruised face, and the man who had taken his new shoes. She tossed and turned in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her small apartment felt especially empty. Pictures of her grown children sat on the dresser. Jason in his army uniform, Keisha in her college graduation cap. They had both turned out well, and Shanice was proud. But they were far away now, living their own lives. At 3 a.m, Shanice gave up on sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and made a phone call. "I know it's late, Cheryl, but I need your help," Shanice said to her cousin who worked as a social worker. Shanice told Cheryl everything about Marcus. The bruises, the grandmother who was always tired, and now this man who wouldn't let Marcus leave the house. "I'm worried sick about that boy," Shanice said, her voice cracking. "I understand your concern," Cheryl replied, "but I can't file a report based just on that. We need more specific information. Where he lives, full names, clear evidence of abuse or neglect." "So I'm supposed to just do nothing?" Shanice asked, frustration in her voice. "No," Cheryl said firmly. "Keep an eye on him. Document everything you notice, dates, times, any marks or concerning things he says. That could help build a case if needed." After hanging up, Shanice found a small notebook. On the first page, she wrote Marcus and the date. Then she wrote down everything she could remember. When he first came in, the bruises she had seen, his comments about his grandmother, and the man. The next day at work, Shanice kept the notebook in her apron pocket. When Marcus came in, she was relieved to see him. He looked tired, but had no new bruises. "Hey, sweetie," she greeted him. "The usual today." Marcus nodded and slid into his booth. As Shanice brought his food, she casually asked, "How's your grandma doing?" "Still sick," Marcus said. "She sleeps a lot." "And that man, is he still there?" Shanice tried to keep her voice light. Marcus's shoulders tensed. "Yeah, he drinks the brown bottles and then gets mad." Shanice wrote this down in her notebook when she went back to the kitchen. Over the next week, Shanice carefully gathered more information. She learned that Marcus's grandmother's name was Ruth. The man was called Dale. They lived where the train tracks end, in the blue house with the broken fence. Each day, she wrote down what Marcus ate, what he said, and how he looked. Some days were better than others. Marcus seemed to be getting thinner, though, and his eyes had lost the spark that had briefly appeared when she gave him the sneakers. One evening, a truck driver named Joe came into the diner. Shanice had known him for years. He was telling her about his route when he mentioned passing that rundown place by the train tracks. "There's a blue house there with a broken fence," Shanice said quickly. "Do you know it?" Joe nodded. "Sure do. Old lady lives there with her grandson, I think. Heard some rough guy moved in recently. Bad news, that one." Shanice's heart beat faster. "What's the exact address?" Joe thought for a moment. "It's 1422 Railroad End Road. Hard to miss. It's the most beat-up house on the street." That night, after her shift, Shanice drove to Railroad End Road. She found the blue house easily. It looked even worse than she had imagined. The paint was peeling, 2 windows were covered with plastic instead of glass, and the front steps were half broken. A dim light showed through the window. Shanice parked across the street and watched the house for a while. She saw a shadow move past the window, a small shadow that could only be Marcus. On her way home, Shanice called Cheryl again. "I have an address," she said firmly, "and I think we need to do something soon." Cheryl promised Shanice she would look into Marcus's situation, but warned that these things take time. "The system can be slow," she explained. "Keep watching out for him." For the next week, Marcus continued coming to the diner. Each day, Shanice recorded his appearance in her notebook. She noticed he was wearing the same clothes every day now. His hair was unwashed, and dark circles had formed under his eyes. Shanice started packing extra food for him to take home. "Make sure you eat some of this too," she would tell him. "Not just for your grandma." Marcus would nod, but Shanice wasn't sure if he was listening. On Monday, Marcus didn't show up at the diner, nor on Tuesday. By Wednesday, Shanice was beside herself with worry. "I'm going to that house after work," she told Frank. "You want me to go with you?" Frank asked, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concern. "No," Shanice said. "I don't want to scare him, or make that man angry." That evening, Shanice drove to the blue house again. She parked her car and walked up to the broken front steps. Her heart was beating fast. She had never done anything like this before. Just as she raised her hand to knock, she heard shouting from inside. A man's voice, loud and angry. Then a crash, like something breaking. Shanice froze, her fist still in the air. "You worthless little." The man's words were slurred, but clear enough to make Shanice's blood run cold. She heard a child's cry, "Marcus." Without thinking, Shanice pounded on the door. "Hello," she called out. "Everything okay in there?" The shouting stopped. Heavy footsteps came toward the door. It swung open, revealing a tall man with bloodshot eyes and a stained shirt. The smell of alcohol hit Shanice like a wave. "Who the hell are you?" the man demanded. Shanice stood her ground, even though she was scared. "I'm looking for Marcus." "Is he here?" The man's eyes narrowed. "You the nosy waitress. He told me about you, giving him free food, shoes. We don't need your charity." Behind the man, Shanice caught a glimpse of Marcus. He stood in the shadows, his face pale with fear. When he saw Shanice, his eyes widened in surprise. "I just want to make sure he's okay," Shanice said firmly. "He's fine. Now mind your own business." The man tried to close the door, but Shanice put her foot in the way. "Marcus," she called. "Are you all right, honey?" The man shoved Shanice's shoulder hard, making her stumble backward. "Get off my property before I call the cops." As Shanice regained her balance, an elderly woman appeared behind the man. She was thin and frail, with gray hair that needed washing. "This must be Ruth, Marcus's grandmother." "Who is it, Dale?" the woman asked in a weak voice. "Nobody," Dale snapped. "Go back to bed." Ruth swayed on her feet. She looked sick, just as Marcus had said. Her eyes were unfocused, and she gripped the wall for support. "I'm Shanice," Shanice said quickly. "I've been feeding Marcus at the diner. I was worried when he didn't come in." Ruth looked confused. "The diner. Marcus isn't supposed to leave the house. Dale says it's not safe." Dale grabbed Ruth's arm roughly. "I said go back to bed." As he turned to deal with Ruth, Marcus darted forward and whispered urgently to Shanice. "Grandma's real sick. He won't let the doctor come. He takes her pills." Dale spun around and saw Marcus talking to Shanice. His face turned dark with rage. He lunged toward the boy, grabbing him by the collar. "What did I tell you about talking to strangers?" he shouted, raising his hand. Shanice didn't think. She stepped forward and pushed between them. "Don't you touch him." Dale's raised hand came down hard, hitting Shanice's shoulder instead of Marcus. The blow knocked her against the doorframe. "Get out," Dale shouted. "Both of you get out of my house." "It's not your house," Ruth said suddenly, her voice surprisingly clear. "It's my house, and you need to stop hurting my grandson." Dale's face turned red with anger at Ruth's words. "You shut up, old woman. You'd be in a nursing home if it wasn't for me." Ruth swayed on her feet but stood her ground. "I want you to leave, Dale. Now." Dale laughed, an ugly sound. "You can barely stand up. Who's going to make me leave?" Shanice pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police right now." Dale's eyes narrowed. He lunged for Shanice's phone, but she stepped back quickly. As Dale moved, Marcus ran to his grandmother and helped her stay standing. "Go ahead, call them," Dale sneered. "Ruth won't press charges. She needs me." "I don't need someone who hurts my grandson," Ruth said weakly. Shanice dialed 911 with shaking fingers. When the operator answered, she explained the situation as clearly as she could. Dale paced back and forth, cursing under his breath. "The police are coming," Shanice said after hanging up. "You should leave before they get here." "This isn't over," Dale growled. He grabbed a jacket from a hook by the door and shoved past Shanice. He stumbled down the broken steps and disappeared into the night. As soon as Dale was gone, Ruth collapsed into a chair. Up close, Shanice could see how sick she really was. Her skin was yellow, her breathing shallow. "Thank you," Ruth whispered. "I've been trying to get him to leave, but I'm too weak." "Grandma needs a doctor," Marcus said, his voice full of worry. "Dale wouldn't let me call one." Shanice knelt beside Ruth and gently took her hand. "When did you last take your medicine?" "Dale sells it," Ruth said. "Says we need the money more than the pills." Shanice felt a wave of anger. No wonder Ruth was so sick. The police arrived 15 minutes later. 2 officers came inside while another looked around outside for any sign of Dale. They asked questions and took notes. Shanice showed them the notebook where she had recorded her concerns about Marcus. "Ma'am, you need medical attention," one officer told Ruth. "We're going to call an ambulance." While they waited for the ambulance, Shanice helped Marcus pack a small bag with his clothes and a few toys. She knew he couldn't stay in the house alone. "Where will I go?" Marcus asked, his voice small and scared. "I don't know yet, honey," Shanice said honestly. "But I promise I'll make sure you're safe." The ambulance arrived with flashing lights. The paramedics checked Ruth and quickly decided she needed to go to the hospital. "Her liver's failing," one paramedic said quietly to the police officer. "She should have been under a doctor's care." As they loaded Ruth into the ambulance, she reached for Shanice's hand. "Please watch over Marcus," she begged. "I don't have anyone else." "I will," Shanice promised. "You focus on getting better." After the ambulance left, a police officer approached Shanice. "Social services is on their way for the boy. Do you know if he has any other family?" "Not that I know of," Shanice replied. She looked at Marcus, who stood alone on the broken porch steps, watching his grandmother being taken away. "I can take him tonight," Shanice offered. "I've known him for months. He trusts me." The officer shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. That's not how it works. He'll need to go with social services until they can figure out proper placement. Shanice felt her heart breaking as she watched Marcus climb into a car with a social worker. His eyes were dry but filled with fear. Just before the car door closed, he looked at Shanice. "Will I still see you?" he asked. "Yes," Shanice said firmly. "I promise. This isn't goodbye." As the car drove away, Shanice made a decision. She pulled out her phone again and called Cheryl. "I need your help," she said. "I want to become a foster parent." The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Shanice's life. She worked her shifts at the diner, but her heart wasn't in it. She kept looking at the corner booth, hoping to see Marcus sitting there, but the booth remained empty. Cheryl helped Shanice start the process to become a foster parent. There were many forms to fill out. Her apartment needed to be checked. She had to take classes in the evenings after work. The process would take months, Cheryl warned her. "But what about Marcus?" Shanice asked. "Where is he now?" "He's in emergency foster care," Cheryl explained. "A temporary home until a more permanent solution can be found." "Is he okay? Can I see him?" Shanice asked. "I'm working on it," Cheryl promised. "These things take time." Meanwhile, Ruth was still in the hospital. Shanice visited her whenever she could. The doctors said Ruth's liver was badly damaged from not taking her medicine. She was very weak. "Have you seen Marcus?" Ruth asked every time Shanice visited. "Not yet," Shanice would answer. "But I'm trying." On the third visit, Ruth held Shanice's hand tightly. "If anything happens to me," she whispered, "please don't let Marcus go to strangers. He's had enough pain in his short life." "I'm doing everything I can," Shanice promised. At the diner, Shanice told Frank and Tinette everything that had happened. They were both worried about Marcus too. "That poor kid," Frank said, shaking his head. "Some people shouldn't be allowed around children." The police were still looking for Dale. He had disappeared after that night. Ruth had pressed charges against him for theft and abuse, but they couldn't find him. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after that terrible night, Shanice was working her usual shift when the diner door opened. Marcus walked in. He looked clean and was wearing new clothes, but his eyes were sad. A woman in a neat suit walked beside him. "Marcus," Shanice cried, rushing toward him. She stopped herself from hugging him, not sure if it was allowed. Marcus gave her a small smile. "Hi, Miss Shanice." The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Taylor from Child Protective Services. "Marcus has been asking to see you," she explained. His caseworker thought it might help him adjust. Frank came out from the kitchen. "Well, look who's here. Sit anywhere you like, young man. Lunch is on the house today." Marcus and Mrs. Taylor sat in his usual corner booth. Shanice brought them menus, her hands shaking with emotion. "How are you doing, sweetie?" she asked Marcus. "Okay," he said with a shrug. "The people I'm staying with are nice. But I miss Grandma." "She misses you too," Shanice said. "I've been visiting her." Mrs. Taylor watched their interaction closely. After they ordered food, she asked Shanice if they could talk privately for a moment. At a nearby table, Mrs. Taylor spoke softly. "Ruth Wilson's condition is getting worse. The doctors don't think she'll be able to care for Marcus again, even if she recovers enough to leave the hospital." Shanice nodded sadly. She had feared as much. "Marcus has no other family that we can locate," Mrs. Taylor continued. "We need to find a permanent placement for him." "I'm working on becoming a foster parent," Shanice said quickly. "I want to take him." Mrs. Taylor smiled. "Yes, your cousin Cheryl mentioned that. Usually the process takes months, but given the circumstances and your established relationship with Marcus, we might be able to expedite things." Shanice felt hope rise in her chest. "Really? There's still paperwork and home visits and background checks," Mrs. Taylor warned. "But Marcus clearly trusts you. That means a lot." As they talked, Shanice noticed 4 black SUVs pull into the diner parking lot. Men and women in uniforms got out. "What's happening?" Shanice asked. suddenly worried. Mrs. Taylor looked out the window. "Oh, they're early. That's the team." "Team?" Shanice asked. "We've located Dale Jenkins," Mrs. Taylor explained. "The police are arresting him today. We brought Marcus here not just to see you, but to keep him safe during the arrest. Those SUVs are police and protective services." Officers from the 4 black SUVs entered the diner. The head officer, a tall woman with kind eyes, came to their table. "Mrs. Taylor, we've got him," she said quietly. "Dale Jenkins was hiding at his brother's place. He's in custody now." Marcus overheard this, and his small shoulders relaxed visibly. Shanice realized he had been living in fear that Dale would find him again. "Is it really over?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," the officer told him with a gentle smile. "He can't hurt you or your grandmother anymore." Shanice felt tears in her eyes. She had been so worried about Marcus, and now at last he was safe. That evening, after the police and Mrs. Taylor had left, Frank let Shanice leave work early. Together, she and Marcus went to visit Ruth in the hospital. Ruth was asleep when they arrived, looking small and frail in the hospital bed. The doctor took Shanice aside while Marcus sat with his grandmother. "Her condition is getting worse," the doctor said softly. "Her liver is failing. She needs a transplant, but at her age and with her other health problems." The doctor didn't need to finish. Shanice understood that Ruth might not have much time left. When Ruth woke up and saw Marcus, her tired face lit up with joy. "My sweet boy," she whispered, reaching for his hand. Marcus told her about Dale's arrest. Ruth closed her eyes in relief. "Thank God," she said. They spent an hour together, Ruth drifting in and out of sleep. Before they left, Ruth asked to speak to Shanice alone. "Thank you for looking out for him," Ruth said, her voice weak. "I should have protected him better." "You did your best," Shanice assured her. "Will you take care of him when I'm gone?" Ruth asked directly, her eyes clear and serious. "If they'll let me, yes," Shanice promised. Ruth nodded, satisfied. "He needs love. That's all he's ever needed." 3 weeks later, Ruth passed away peacefully in her sleep. Marcus was devastated. The day after the simple funeral, Shanice found him sitting in his usual booth at the diner, staring blankly at the table. "I'm all alone now," he said when Shanice sat across from him. "No, you're not," Shanice said firmly. "You have me. And Frank. And Tina. And we're not going anywhere." Over the next few months, with Cheryl's help, Shanice completed all the requirements to become a foster parent. It wasn't easy. Her apartment was small. Her job didn't pay much. But her heart was big, and her determination was strong. 6 months to the day after those 4 black SUVs had pulled up to the diner, Marcus moved into Shanice's apartment. Mrs. Taylor brought him with his small bag of belongings. "It's not fancy," Shanice said, showing him his new room. She had painted it blue, his favorite color, and bought a desk for his schoolwork. "It's perfect," Marcus said, his eyes wide. That evening, Frank and Tina came over with a cake that said, "Welcome home, Marcus," in blue frosting. They all sat in Shanice's small living room, eating cake and telling stories. As the evening ended, Marcus helped clean up the dishes. He was smiling, not the cautious, small smile from before, but a real happy smile that made his whole face light up. "Thank you," he said to Shanice as she tucked him into bed that night. "For the food at first, and then for everything else." "You know what?" Shanice said, smoothing his hair. "The food was never just food. It was my way of saying I see you. I care about you." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why it meant so much." 1 year later, Shanice officially adopted Marcus. The judge at the courthouse smiled as he signed the papers. "Usually I ask if anyone objects," the judge said, "but I've never seen so many letters of support for an adoption before." Frank, Tina, and the regular customers from the diner had all written letters saying the same thing. Shanice and Marcus belonged together. As they walked out of the courthouse, Marcus took Shanice's hand. "We're family now," he said. "For real." "We always were," Shanice replied. "From that very first meal."